My name is John Williams. I am an artist, and also told that I'm the last person to climb Mount St. Helens from base to summit. I climbed on April the 30th, 1980. That was 18 days before the massive eruption of May 18th, 1980. I got the idea to climb mountains when I was a little kid. It was about 1962. My family and I were at a friend's house. I'm filming this in my studio, by the way. There's little bugs flying around. There's all kinds of distractions. But anyway, we went to this friend's house and they had the movie on called The Mountain with Spencer Tracy and Robert Wagner. And I just fell in love with the idea of being up in the snow and ice and whatever in the middle of the summertime, the huge crevasses and ice bridges and all that stuff, and the height. It just looked beautiful. And my life was kind of adventurous. I mean, when I was about 16, I left home and went down to the Missouri Ozarks, down at Sunrise Beach, Missouri. And in those days, this is at Lake of the Ozarks, and in those days, Lake of the Ozarks was still pretty rustic. Wasn't built up like it is today. And I found a cave along the waterfront down there. And I lived in the cave, and I got a job at a local sawmill down there for $1.75 an hour. I was just kind of like a mill hand. I would shovel sawdust and help cinch the logs up onto the belt, with the cant hook or stack pallets. That's what we were doing, making oak pallets, and I did that. And I'd ride the school bus to my workplace because the sawmill was right down the road from the elementary school, and down there the elementary and the high school both rode the same bus. So, but I'd get off, being 16, I'd get off at the elementary school, which made me look kind of slow, I suppose. But in any case, that was my first adventure. And then in 1974, a friend of mine and I hitchhiked all around the American West, Montana, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma. I mean, we went all over the place. And I fell in love with the American West, and I fell in love with mountains. I saw Mount Hood from the Columbia River Gorge area. And then in 1975, I got the wanderlust again, and a couple of friends of mine and I decided to go to Oregon, out to the coast, and we were going to hitchhike out there. And we got a lot of rides, and we got to Missoula, Montana. We had just been up to Glacier and tried to get into Canada, but they wouldn't let us in because we didn't have insurance. So we got a ride, went back down to Missoula, and we got a ride with an Army captain and his wife, and they were driving this great big motorhome and had a little pacer car on the back of it, towing that. And he was going to Fort Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. And he asked us, he actually snuck us into Canada over in Vancouver, and we went to Gastown, and he plied us with drinks and asked us if we could help him get his motorhome over the Alaskan highway. Well, we decided we would, and we got to Dawson Creek. Well, that night it snowed, and my friends chickened out, and they got bus tickets home, and I didn't have enough money for a bus ticket, so I was committed to go all the way to Anchorage, and that's what I did. And the Army captain paid my way home. He bought me a plane ticket home. That was the first time I ever flew commercially, by the way, which I don't know, that's not even worth mentioning probably. But in any case, in March of 1980, I saw that Mount St. Helens was erupting. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was in the 2nd Marine Division, 2nd Field Service Support Group. And I was in the Navy, but I was attached to the Marine Corps. I'd volunteered for it because I found out they were going to put me on a ship, and I didn't want to go on a ship. I figured on a Marine base, I'm going to be a ground pounder, so that's not a problem. But in any case, I saw that Mount St. Helens was erupting on the nightly news, and I told my buddies, I said, you see that? When I get out of here, I'm going to climb Mount St. Helens. And they're like, oh, yeah, right, John. Sure, you're going to do it. Sure, sure. Well, I was scheduled to get out on April the 15th. So I got out and told my family what I was going to do. And my brother, he said, I want to go with you. I want to go with you. Well, he was working at the time. He said, well, you got to wait 2 weeks so I can get my time off, my vacation time. I said, well, I don't want to wait because the mountain's calming down. Well, in retrospect, that's probably a good thing, because if the time I got out there, if I'd have waited 2 more weeks, I probably would have been there right when the May 18th eruption took place, and would probably not be telling you this story right now. And I did a little research before I went out there. I found out that, everything I could about the mountain. I read about volcanoes and Mount St. Helens in particular. I had a Rand McNally Road Atlas. I was going to use that as my guide for hitchhiking, and I thought I knew just about all I needed to know. I had no climbing equipment, no climbing experience whatsoever, none whatsoever. I had a pair of Dexter hiking boots that I bought at the Base Exchange, and I put Snow Seal on them to make them waterproof, because I figured that would help out. I had my camouflage BDUs that I'd wear there on the base, and I bought a bus ticket. And on the way out there, believe it or not, I got a seat right next to a geologist from the University of Oregon. And he told me all he could about volcanoes, and he cautioned me strongly about doing it. He said he had 6 of his friends die in a volcanic eruption in Central America. And that was pretty sobering, but it wasn't going to stop me. Anyway, I got to a town just below Longview, Washington, and I realized I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I made a mistake and miscalculated, and so I told the bus driver I wanted to go on to Longview. He said, well, you can't do that, and we argued and argued and argued. And finally he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll let you go, but I'm going to tear a piece of your ticket off, so that's going to make you short on your way back home. I said, okay, whatever. So I got to Longview, and I started my hitchhiking. Well, it'd been a little while since, like, say, the mid-'70s when I had hitchhiked. Here it was 1980, and the Jack Kerouac and the hippie thing was over with. And what I ran into was people were yelling at me out of their cars, obscenities, and get off the road, hippie, and, that kind of thing, or get a job, hippie, and all that kind of nonsense. And I was really discouraged, and I went down under this bridge. I don't even know what river it was over, whether it was the Lewis River, the Toutle River. I don't know what it was. All I remember, there was like a silver truss bridge there, 4-lane job going there, through there. And I ate a little bit, and I got something to drink, but I was really low. I could hardly move. I was so discouraged and dejected. And finally I decided, well, I'm just going to have to admit I'm defeated and go back home. And so I got back up on the highway, and I had a 66-pound pack, believe it or not. You could tell I really knew a lot about hiking in the mountains. But I got out on the highway, and I wasn't even hitchhiking. I was just walking to the bus station. And this girl pulls over in a red Camaro, and she goes, hey, you want to ride? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And so I got in the car. And she goes, what are you doing? I said, she says, where are you going? I said, well, I was going up to Mount St. Helens, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get a ride. I said, I'm going to the bus station. I'm giving up. She goes, oh, I got some friends who could get you up there. She said, that's no problem. She goes, let's go have a drink and we'll talk it over. So we went to this place called Porky's Tavern in Longview. It's still there to this day. Back in those days, it was kind of a biker logger bar, It was a little rough around the edges. I think it's kind of a little more gentrified, but not much today. But they were selling T-shirts, and behind the counter, and they had a T-shirt that said, where were you when Mount St. Helens erupted, and had a line drawing of Mount St. Helens with, smoke coming out. And excuse me, at Porky's Tavern, on there, Longview, Washington. I said, man, I got to have one of those. I think it was about $9 or something like that. So I bought a t-shirt because I figured if anybody was going to have a story about where they were when Mount St. Helens erupted, I was going to be the one. But anyway, in any case, I spent the night there, and it was a weird situation. These people reminded me of the Manson family. I mean, even the guy that was the head of it, he had real dark hair, kind of short, and a little stockier than Charles Manson. But there was about 6 or 7 girls there and a couple guys living there, and then the leader of the group. And there was an old man who lived out in the driveway in like a travel trailer, and it was a nice house. I mean, it was brick and a ranch house. While I was staying at the house, the next morning I heard on the radio that Mount St. Helens, the north face, which I had planned to climb originally, was swelling at the rate of 10 feet a day. And so I decided to climb the south face to avoid any possible eruption of Mount St. Helens. Next morning we got up and they had this old school bus. It wasn't a short bus, it was a little longer than a short bus. But they had cleaned the inside of it out, and they put a pot-bellied stove in there and had a stovepipe and the whole 9 yards, and they had brick around the stove and Persian rug kind of thing, and tie-dyed, stuff on the ceiling. And anyway, they drove me out to a point that was kind of north and west of Mount St. Helens, and I think it was probably around 9 or 10 in the morning, and you could see the sun glinting off the ice, and it looked pretty steep from that vantage point. And the driver turns around and says to me, he goes, "Come here, look at this." He goes, "Now you tell me, do you think you could climb that with no climbing experience and no climbing gear?" And I looked at it and I go, yeah. I mean, I got excited looking at it. It was a challenge. But anyway, he drove me up a bunch of logging roads. We were kind of on the southwest side of the mountain by that time. And I remember this one logging road. It went back in the dark woods. It was kind of deep and dark. And there was a lot of snow drifts on it, left over from the previous winter. And he got out on that, and that bus the tires started spinning. Well, as it spun, it started sliding over to the edge of this like 300 or 400 foot precipice. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, man, I said, if this bus goes over that precipice, I'm going to be back here with that stove and all those bricks and all that other stuff flying around in here. I'm going to be a mess, by the time I get to the bottom of that. And finally the guy had enough sense to back the thing out of there. And the next memorable thing I remember is it was probably mid-afternoon by this time. We came to a place where there was a real sharp switchback going up the mountain. It was a little more open there. They'd done some clear cutting there. And Weyerhaeuser, I found out from this book, In the Path of Destruction by Richard Waite. I'm mentioned on page 72, by the way. I'm not endorsing his book, and he's not endorsing my videotape, by the way. But anyway, I found out that Weyerhaeuser had cut a bunch of trees down on these logging roads, and they were using that to keep people out of there. Well, we came to a tree, and whether it was a fir or a pine, I do not know. The thing was as big around as a car, like a Beetle, a Volkswagen Beetle or something like that. And that's all I can liken it to. But the thing was pretty big, and these people had a logging chain in the bus, and they whipped those, the logging chain out of there and wrapped it around the tree, and they hooked it on the front bumper. They had these special hooks that they'd welded onto the front bumper for, I guess, just this type of occasion. And they started yanking on this tree. Well, I got out of the bus, but the whole front end of the bus was coming off the ground. When the tension on the chain would get tight, the bus would flip off the ground. Well, there was like a row of cars, maybe 5 or 6 cars behind us, and they were waiting, hoping that we would get it out of the way so they could go up there too and look at Mount St. Helens. And there was one car right behind our bus. It was a little gray Toyota Corolla, and it had a man and a woman in it. And as soon as we got the tree out of the way, the whole group of people, they went around us and went on up the road. And the couple in the gray Toyota Corolla, they went up to a point where the mountain made another switchback and went around the backside of the mountain. And they were parked there. They were eating sandwiches and whatever when I got up there. But before I got up there, all this time I'm thinking, why would these people spend so much time trying to get me to Mount St. Helens? I haven't paid them anything. You know, what's in it for them? What are they going to get out of this? Well, when they let me out of the bus and said, this is as far as we're going, and I don't know why that was. Excuse me, my allergies are kicking up here. I don't know why that was. But this one guy said to me, he said, you know, you shouldn't mess with Mother Nature. It'll get you every time. And from that I deduced they were probably bringing me out here just to make sure I got killed or something. I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. I got a gnat here worrying me. But in any case, I walked on up to where this couple was parked, and it was hard for me because I'd been stationed on the coast of North Carolina. Here I was going from the coast to, you know, mountain view here, mountain level. And I got up there, and they were eating ham sandwiches and drinking Cokes, and they asked me, hey, you want some lunch? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And they go, what are you doing out here? And I said, well, I'm going to climb Mount St. Helens and take pictures of the crater. And they were kind of tickled by that. And I found out the guy's name was Gerald Edwards, and he was a public engineer for the Washington State Department of Transportation. He gave me one of his business cards. And the woman was Mary P. Legree, I think was her name. That was his girlfriend. And they were there to look for an elk sign so they could go elk hunting later on. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you eat lunch with us, and we'll take you down to the roadblock. And I said, well, that sounds great. He said, that'll get you really close to the mountain. He goes, I know all the trails back in there. I used to hunt back in there. And he goes, I'll draw you a map and I'll get you all fixed up. And I said, okay, that sounds great. So they drove me down to the roadblock, and by that time it was like, you know, evening, and the shadows were getting long, and it was getting kind of dark. And we pulled up to the roadblock, and there were a bunch of cars there, and there were people getting turned around there. And I got out of the car and went up to talk to the deputy, and the deputy looked at my BDUs, or my camouflage, and he goes, I know why you're here. He goes, if I catch you inside this red zone, I'm going to burn you. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I went back and told Gerald Edwards what the guy said. He said, don't worry about it. He goes, don't worry about it. He goes, I'll get you behind the roadblock. He goes, I'll just take you down the road about a mile. There's a creek off to the side here. I think it's Dry Creek. He goes, you just hike down to Dry Creek and then follow that creek up for about a mile and a half, and you'll be beyond the roadblock. And he said, he drew me a map, and he said, there's a logging road on the left, or that goes north. And he said, you'll go up there maybe 3/4 of a mile, and you'll find a trail up there. And there's a rock that says Bluebird on it. It's painted on the rock. Bluebird, or Blue Jay, I can't remember. It's been 30-some years, maybe more. But in any case, I did what he said, and I got up beyond the roadblock, and by that time it was about 8 o'clock or so, and the sun had already gone down, and the place where I was camping, it was real shady, and there were huge trees all around me, moss growing on the ground. I mean, it was comfortable to spread my sleeping bag and everything out on it. And there was a little stream that ran into this Dry Creek, and there was like a shelf, a waterfall there coming down, and I decided to take a bath and get cleaned up. I got kind of hot humping that pack around, and I kind of sponged off in that little stream that was running there next to where I had my bedroll, or my sleeping bag rolled out. It was ice cold. I mean, that woke me up real good. And I busted open a can of Spam and ate that, and real mountain provision there, no freeze-dried for me. But in any case, I got in my sleeping bag. I felt pretty good and felt good to get in there. I was sore and tired, and all of a sudden I heard something moving through the woods, and I'm like, what the heck is that? I thought, well, it must be a bear. You know, I've just eaten. He probably smelled my food. Now it's getting dark. I got to get out of my bag and deal with this bear. You know, I didn't hang my stuff up on a tree and all that nonsense. I just crashed out, you know. I'm like, man, I don't want to get out of the sleeping bag and deal with the bear. So all of a sudden the ground starts heaving, real smooth waves up and down, and I felt like I was on an air mattress on the ocean. And these big trees are going like this, and the limbs, the old dead tree limbs, are falling off of it. And the stream next to me, the water was sloshing over it. Well, my eyes got as big around as saucers. And in my mind's eye, I could see this big wall of lava moving down this valley and going to wipe me out. You know, I mean, I thought that was the end of me for sure. Well, anyway, after that was over with, I was just astounded, but I went to sleep. I was exhausted. Next morning, I woke up right before sunrise. I got up, packed my stuff, and I wanted to get moving. Excuse me, allergy problem here. But anyway, I humped it as fast as I could up this road. I was worried, paranoid there was going to be a sheriff's deputy driving up that way or something to check and, you know, making sure nobody was up there. And I humped up the road and I made it to the logging road. And I got on that, I felt a little safer that way. And I moved as fast as I could up the logging road. And I remember looking off to the left and there was a logging camp over there. And I was worried about that. I thought maybe somebody might be there. They might phone in that I was up there. And you're probably saying, well, what are you worried about being in there? Well, there was a $600 fine and there was 6 months in jail if you were caught inside the red zone. Well, I just barely had enough money to buy my food and get out there on the bus, you know, and back. I didn't want to get thrown into jail. I didn't want a police record, basically. But I guess a week or so before I decided to go there, there was some guys that took a helicopter up there and decided to do a Rainier beer commercial up there. Well, they got caught and they got busted for it, and I didn't want that to happen to me. But I figured if they could do it, I could do it. But anyway, I finally made it to the rock where it said Bluebird, and I started up the trail, and it wasn't too bad. It was kind of dry, you know, and I was going through a lot of alders, alder thickets and things like that. And then I got to where the snow filled in the trail. I couldn't tell where to go. So I just kind of, by dead reckoning, figured I would walk an angle through the woods to where I thought, you know, I would see the mountain. Well, that was okay, except the snow was really soft there. I mean, it was like a snow cone, if you could imagine walking on a snow cone with a 66-pound pack. And I'd take a few steps and then I would sink up to my waist in the snow, and I'd have to take my pack off and wiggle my way out of the snow and kind of scooch across the snow. Well, I found out that if I followed a path along the drip line of the trees, the pines and the firs or whatever, that it was frozen there. All the drippage had frozen into a sheet of ice there, and I could walk on that and not collapse into the snow. Well, I did that, but I still had to cross places where I would sink up to my waist. You know, it was a real hassle. But in any case, the higher I went, the firmer the snow got, and I could walk on it. And the texture kind of changed a little bit too. But anyway, I remember I got in this like valley or ravine, and it was like 300 or 400 feet, you know, on both sides going straight up. It was pretty narrow, filled with snow. Snow covered everything. And I got in there and I thought, well, the one on the left, if I climb that, I'll bet you it's like it levels off and it goes up to the edge of the tree line on the mountain. And so what I did is I started kicking steps, you know, up the side of this thing, and it was probably a pitch about like that, okay? And it got a little steeper as I got further up, and so I'm kicking steps in there, and I get You don't have any crampons. You don't have any equipment. You can't hold on to anything. I said, if this snow thing, this step collapses, you're going to fall 250 feet, slide, and you got a 66-pound pack on your back. You're probably going to break your legs, your ankles, your hips, and who knows what else. And I mean, I was scared. I was literally scared. I was almost afraid to move. You know what I mean? But I did persevere, and I did get up there, and I got on top, and the stress and just the effort just wore me out. I was exhausted, and I just laid back and just laid there for like 30 minutes. And I decided to eat a little something and get a drink of water. And I looked toward where I was supposed to see Mount St. Helens, and I didn't see it. And I realized I was lost. So I thought, well, I'll go back down, and I'll go around this mountainous area that I'm in, you know. And I'll probably see Mount St. Helens that way. So that's what I did, is I kind of slid down a ravine, and I put my backpack in front of me. It was real gravelly, and I thought, well, if I get to sliding too fast, I can always land on the backpack, and maybe that'll cushion my fall, and I won't break too many bones. And so I did that. And I got down to the bottom, and what do I see? There's an elk carcass down there. There's a little bit of meat on the bones, and it's been picked clean by some animals. I mean, there was nothing on the skeleton except little bits of meat. And I thought to myself, you know, that's going to be you if you're not careful. And careful, here I was at Mount St. Helens, and it's getting ready to blow up. And how careful is that? But anyway, I continued around. It was kind of a swampy area, a marshy area there, and I continued around this kind of mountainous area. And lo and behold, there was Mount St. Helens to my left. And I could see the tree line going up, you know, and there was kind of a mountainous ridge or two there between me and the mountain. And I headed toward that. And this one kind of mountainous looking thing, I found an elk trail that went up to the top and over it. And so I got on that, and I got maybe 3/4 of the way up the thing. And on the way, I was picking these seepages of pine resin. There were like big balls of it, and I picked it up, and I was going to use it for a fire starter if I had to build a fire. You know, it would be like having gasoline or something. And so I collected some of that, and then I got up to this like hairpin turn, and the wind started, you know, blowing, and it got kind of rough and tumble looking in the sky. Started clouding up, and I could sense that there was a change in the air. And so I spread my sleeping bag, put a, you know, a space blanket out under my sleeping bag, and then I put my sleeping bag out and put another space blanket on top of that and crawled in there and covered my face up with the space blanket and went to sleep. And the next morning I woke up and it was pitch black. I was like, what the heck? And I pulled the space blanket back, and snow kind of fell on my face. It had snowed during the night about 6 or 8 inches. And my feet were cold. I guess my feet kind of poked out of the space blanket, and the sleeping bag got wet. You know, my warmth from my feet melted the snow on my sleeping bag. But in any case, the sky started getting little holes in it, and I looked up at the mountain, and it looked like it was about 1.5 miles away up to the edge of the tree line. And there's like 2 fingers of snow that stick down into the tree line on the south side. There are 2 fingers of trees that stick up into the snow on the kind of south side of Mount St. Helens. You can see it in a photograph from space. And I camped in the westernmost, or the left finger there, right at the tip. And it was just beautiful. All these little window panes of snow were floating around, and then there was like a real bright ring of silvery white light, yellow white light, gold white light, I don't know how to describe it, around the mountain where the clouds butted up, but there was still a space, you know, and the sun could get down in there. And then there were like bright patches of sunlight where it was coming through the clouds, but everything else was dark, you know, and you'd see these window pane things sparkling in these shafts of white light coming through the clouds. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I got up to the point of the finger there, and I decided to take my picture. Let's see, what was, gosh, that was near the end of that day, and it started clouding up again, I think. I'm trying to remember. But in any case, I got up there, and yeah, it did cloud up that afternoon. It started clouding up again. And I got up there, and I built myself a fire and dried my boots out, my clothes and everything. And then I took a picture of myself. I'll show you that photo. And you could see the string running from my camera to the camera, and I used that like a shutter release. My dad and I worked on that, to remember. But in any case, I got up there, and yeah, it did cloud up that afternoon. It started clouding up again. And I got up there, and I built myself a fire and dried my boots out, my clothes and everything. And then I took a picture of myself. I'll show you that photo. And you could see the string running from my camera to the camera, and I used that like a shutter release. My dad and I worked on that. But in any case, I took my photo, and I bedded down. I just kind of watched the mountain that day just to see what was going to happen. And like I say, it got cloudy. Well, that night, it cleared off. I woke up about midnight, and the moon was full and bright. I mean, it was just like having a flashlight. It was beautiful, clear and crisp. And I remember looking over toward Portland, Oregon, and it looked like a brush fire on the horizon. It was really beautiful, all the lights of the city. And I remember looking up at the moon, and you could see like heat waves moving over the moon. And I told this to Richard Waite, but he didn't believe me. He said, that's impossible. But I know what I saw, okay, and I have no reason to make it up. That's just it. But anyway, I decided to leave my pack there on the climb, and I took some, snacks and food, and I took a canteen full of water, like a quart canteen, Army canteen. I had one of those. And I started humping up the mountain. I was trying to go as fast as I could, but like I said, I was a flatlander, and it was very difficult for me to do. I did the best I could do. Doggone, these gnats are driving me crazy. I'm in my studio, by the way, and this is one of my paintings behind me. But anyway, I humped it as fast as I could, and I remember getting some anxiety around sunrise because I thought, oh no, the sun's going to come out, and I was worried because, there were helicopters going back and forth to the summit. Well, I didn't know what that was all about until I read Richard Waite's book. In my mind, it could have been the sheriff's office or any number of people out there to make sure nobody was climbing the mountain. That's what I was worried about, was getting caught. Well, as the sun came up, you could see like spin drifts of ash blowing across the surface. It was really cool, like little tornadoes of dust devils of ash in the morning sun blowing along. And I continued to climb, and I remember it was about sunrise. I remember I stopped near these great big rocks. I mean, they were as big as a car, and there were like 3 or 4 of them, and they looked like, magma had extruded there at one time in a previous eruption. Well, an earthquake hit, and I'm not sure about the time, but it was somewhere around sunrise. And I was at a place where it was real smooth, like a hump, and I was right on the edge of it, and these rocks are right here. And the mountain was heaving out like this and going back. Heaving out and going back, and I was scared. I felt like it was going to throw me off of there. I was going to slide, for 1,000 feet or something down the mountain. But I remember these rocks, they were clinking and clanking, and you could hear the ground squeaking. I mean, it was the weirdest thing. You could hear the ground squeak. But anyway, that passed. I mean, it was the weirdest thing. You could hear the ground squeak. But anyway, that passed, and I kept on climbing, and nothing really exceptional happened until around, I think it must have been around 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. I could hear a helicopter coming. And I got over there and I just laid down flat on the ground. Kind of pulled the hat down over my... And that song by Carly Simon, I Haven't Got Time for the Pain, was going through my mind, and I fell asleep. And I don't know how long I slept. Didn't have a watch with me. And I woke up and the helicopter was gone. But I remember right before I fell asleep, the helicopter was just hovering out there, and I thought they had seen me, you know what I mean? They were waiting on me to move or something so they could call it in on the radio. Hey, we got a guy out here on the mountain that isn't supposed to be there. But in any case, I kept on climbing. There were these troughs that had been melted into the cone of the mountain, all on the south side there, probably all the way around the mountain for that matter. But they were about waist deep. I could hold on to the sides of them, and rocks that had lodged in this V-shaped thing. I could stand up in it, and it kind of filled, places up with rocks that had been thrown out by the volcano. Well, this wet, hot mud would come down the mountain, and it would hit this. And the wet, hot mud, by the way, looked just exactly what you see coming out of the back of a cement truck. The color was the same, the texture was the same. It had gravel in it. I mean, it would come down there and hit these rock dams, or these rocks that had been thrown out by the volcano, and this mud would build up behind them. Well, the heat from the mud would melt the rocks loose, and then all of that would break loose, and the rocks would come tumbling down. You could hear them poof, poof, poof. I could hear them coming, and I had to watch, because some of them were like this big, I mean, they were tumbling end over end, and if one of those had hit me, it would have killed me. But anyway, I mean, I remember a couple of times I had to jump, like 2 or 3 troughs over just to get away from these rocks. And but anyway, I got up to where this slip was, where there was like a shelf. It was about 300 or 400 feet from the summit, and a helicopter was coming. So I jumped down in this depression. It was like this, and I jumped down in this part of it, and it was ash filled, and I remember there was like a little hairline crack at the bottom, and my face was near it. Well, anyway, while I'm hiding from the helicopter, an earthquake hits. And I had watched these movies like 10 Commandments, where the earth opens up and swallows all these people down into a fiery hell, I thought, man, that's exactly what's going to happen to me in this earthquake. This little tiny hairline crack was opening up to like about an inch wide right in front of my face. And I thought, man, I'm going to get swallowed up by the earth. That's all I could think of. Well, anyway, the helicopter dropped David Johnston off down in the crater. And then it took off, and I decided to make a scramble for the summit. That's what I did. And I got up there, and I remember I took a photograph. There was like a disc up there. It was about this big around, and it was conical in shape, and it was kind of a gray-green and made of fiberglass, and it was some kind of seismic equipment up there. Well, right next to that, they had 2 wooden poles, and it had like day glow, like crime scene tape wrapped around it, and it was kind of blowing in the wind off the top. But they wrapped it around in such a way that it looked like stripes on the pole. And I remember photographing that, and what I did is I put Mount Rainier in the distance in the north between the 2 poles. I thought that'd be a good way to frame it. And I took a shot of that, and then I remember there was like huge cracks off to my right that went down the east side of the mountain. And I think that's where the cracks were, where the whole part of the mountain just went forward in the explosion. But there were huge blocks of ice and snow down in there, and they were all helter-skelter. I took a photo of that down the crack. And I also went over to the west side and took a shot toward the main vent, which I heard it was 20 feet wide. And I also heard, I could see steam coming out of it. I've got a photo here I'll show you. And I want to tell you, I lost a lot of my photos in a fire. And my brother had some photos, and the photos I'm going to show you were the ones I gave my brother, and they weren't all the best. And I was also on a TV show in Kansas City called Perspectives on Channel 4. And they did like a 30-minute program on my climb. And they had the photos. They may still have them today in their archives. I don't know. I've tried to get them, but they won't give them to me. So whatever. But in any case, I got up there and I'm photographing the crater. And I remember I took a picture of Spirit Lake. I have a photo of that. And I have a photo of a forest fire further south. And I think I took a picture of Mount Adams. I can't remember. But in any case, those are the photos I took. And I did not know David Johnston was in the crater. I thought about going down into the crater, but I didn't do it because I thought there might be poisonous gases down there and I might die down there. You know, nobody would even know I was there. I didn't want to risk it. And I also thought about going to see Harry Truman, but after climbing that mountain, I thought about climbing back down there, going over to his house. I thought, man, that'd be a monumental, hike. I didn't want to do that. So I decided just to go back down to my camp, and I was really dehydrated by this time. I ran out of water probably a third of the way up the mountain. And how I managed to keep myself partially hydrated was there were places in the snow, and the glacier on the mountain was covered with ash for the most part, but there were places where, there was snow showing where the wind had blown the stuff away. But there were places where I guess hot gravel had come out of the volcano, landed in the snow, and it melted these little bowl-looking things in the snow. And there would be like a piece of gravel right in the center of it. And then over the weeks, since the first eruption, the snow had melted down away from it. So it looked like a little bowl-shaped mushroom of ice sticking about that high up off the rest of the glacier. And there were like hundreds of them. And I'd go along there and I'd break one off and stick it in my mouth. And of course I had to spit the gravel out, and it was kind of sandy, but it was water, okay. It probably wasn't doing the trick. But in any case, it took me a couple hours to get back down off the mountain. And I got down back off the mountain and I couldn't see the two fingers, in the trees. I think I was quite a bit east of where I should have been. I tracked a straight course and I made a mistake in doing that. I was a little more to the southwest. Well, in any case, I couldn't find my camp, and I'm extremely dehydrated. I'm having trouble thinking. I'm exhausted. I'd been up since probably midnight. I was really worn out. I was getting really concerned because it was getting later in the day and I didn't want to be caught out there all night long and have to sleep out there with no sleeping bag, have no food, and be dehydrated. Well, I finally found my camp and my gear, and I noticed that where the ash was darker on the snow and it would melt into the snow. Well, I had a black trash bag, so I dug a little bowl out in the snow and I spread this black trash bag out on the snow, and I put snow on top of the black trash bag, and the sun melted the snow on the trash bag, and I fixed it in such a way it would run down in a little hole I made to put my canteen in, and it filled my canteen up, and I was able to drink a couple quarts of water that way, and that was a lifesaver for me. And but in any case, I made my camp and rested, and I felt really good because I'd done what I had come there to do, but then I realized I still had to get out of there. So I spent the night there again, and I felt a little better, and I got up the next morning. I started hiking out of there, and I was still aware, there might be helicopters coming over and things like that. And so I backtracked basically all the way down to the road, and I got on the road, and it was like afternoon, it was probably early afternoon, and I got down there, and I kept walking toward the roadblock. Well, as I'm walking toward the roadblock, these two real grungy looking hippie guys, they were dirty. Their jeans were dirty and filthy, and their clothes were dirty and filthy. And they came popping out of the woods, and they go, hey, you, where do you think you're going? And I stopped. I'm like, oh no, I'm busted, I'm caught. But they had these U.S. Forest Service shirts on. They were open, dirty t-shirts, dirty jeans, real long beards, dirty hair. Like they'd been sleeping in the woods with no sleeping bag. And they said, don't you know there's an active volcano up there? It's getting ready to erupt. And I said, oh no, I'm from Kansas City. I said, I don't know this area at all. I just came out here to go hiking, and these people, they gave me a ride out here, and they just dumped me out here and out in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know where I'm at. And they were like, oh, okay, whatever. But they let me go. They let me go. So I didn't actually get out of there without getting caught. But they let me go. They believed my story, or they just didn't want to mess with me. I don't know which. But anyway, I continued down the road, and I never did see the roadblock. I didn't know where the heck I was on this highway. All I know is this highway runs north of Cougar between Mount St. Helens and Cougar, Washington. Well, as I'm going down the road, I see a guy has his car parked along the side of the road. He's got a stick, and he's throwing it, and he's got this Labrador retriever, and the lab is running out there and getting the stick and bringing it back to him. And he goes, you don't have any water that my dog could drink, do you? Well, I had this tin cup that my dad, I bought it, to use out there, but my dad painted on there, on the side, Mount Etna Expedition in black letters. And so what I did was I poured water into that and put it out for his dog. Well, I forgot to take the cup. I mean, I wish I had that cup to this day. But anyway, I told him what I was doing, and I said, hey, if you could get me back to Portland, Oregon, I said, I'll give you a roll of my film. Well, I wasn't going to give him the best rolls of my film. I was going to give him the not-so-good stuff. He goes, yeah, sure. So he drove me back to Portland, to the bus station in Portland, Oregon. And I got in there, and I ran into 3 climbers who were on Mount Adams that same day, and I told them where I'd been, and they said, well, we had to turn back. Said the wind was so bad we couldn't even get up the mountain. And I was like, oh boy, that's wild. But anyway, I rode the bus back home, got home, and my dad suggested I call the newspaper, Kansas City Star, and I called them, and a guy named Doug Breckenridge came out and did an article on my climb, and I'll show you that. And that came out on May the 18th, the day of the eruption. And then Channel 9 came out. I can't remember the reporter's name, Pam Dauber or something like that. She came out, but she came out and did a little interview on me, maybe a 5-minute interview. And then Channel 4, I went down there and I showed them my photos and my ash and all that. And for some reason, they got the impression that I was some kind of a geologist or something. I was throwing out terms like pyroclastic flow and, and telling them all this baloney, basically. And somehow they thought I was a geologist, so they scheduled me for this show called Perspectives. It was like a 30-minute show, and where they would highlight certain things, feature certain things. And I remember in the interview, when the cameras came on, I got stage fright. You know what I mean? I couldn't hardly speak, and I had to overcome that. I did, and the guy was watching me. Stacy Smith was his name, and he was watching me like, come on, buddy, don't freeze up on me. But I didn't. I didn't freeze up, and I was telling him all about that and showing the photos and all of that. And at one point, we had to do a station break. And he goes, so what exactly were you doing out there? And I said, well, I really wasn't supposed to be out there. And his mouth dropped open. He goes, you mean you weren't a geologist or something? I said, no, I wasn't even supposed to be there. I snuck inside the red zone. I said, to take pictures of the crater. He goes, well, that's crazy. He goes, I didn't know that. He goes, so when the station break was over, he goes, here we are with John Williams, who is persona non grata with the United States Forest Service. Well, anyway, that's the end of my climb.